forged on the gridiron in September. Perfected in the magic of March.
Again, rebounded by Indiana. The game is over.
For the fans who love the crunch of the pads, prefer a dunk,
Oh, he just shook the gravity.
and expect nothing but the best. It's Bigger Ten. Here's Steve Dace.
Greetings. Welcome to this week's episode of Bigger Ten. I am Steve Dace. The leaves are changing. There's even like flurries in the forecast this weekend. It is late October. We're heading into the championship run of the college football season as we welcome aboard my co-host and never partner, Aaron McIntyre. Now, of course, it was 81 degrees here in Iowa yesterday. It will not be 81 degrees this weekend, and we may not see 81 degrees again until like next May. But we are now fully ensconced in the heart of the season, my friend.
We are indeed. Took the family to a pumpkin patch on Saturday morning. Of course, morning, not.
Ben's first trip to one of these?
No, we went to one last year, but he was so
would've been too
young back
young.
then that he didn't really. But boy, he had a fun time, and we all did as well. Came back home, watched a lot of football. It was a very fall type of day. And so, yeah, I mean, it's like you said, it's nut cutting time here in college football over the course of the next 4 or 5 weeks.
So we always start the show off here on Bigger Ten with the big 5 topics we want to address. When we put this rundown together over the weekend, and, you know, forgive us, this is not Aaron and I's main gig. We do a lot of other stuff. So we put this rundown together over the weekend. The whole Michigan sign, signal stealing, scouting issue had not really taken on a life of its own yet, as it has here this week. I addressed at least as much of it as I could from a Michigan fan's perspective on Michigan podcast yesterday. So, Aaron, because we did not originally have this in the rundown, before we get to the rundown, I wanted to give you the floor. If people want to know what I think, they can go watch Michigan podcast. Not much at the time you and I are taping this has changed in the story since I discussed it, my thoughts on Michigan podcast. I wanted to give you as much time as you want. No rebuttal comment from me. I want to make sure the audience maybe gets another viewpoint from someone who's maybe not emotionally invested like I am.
No rebuttal?
None.
Man, I can say whatever I want.
Whatever you want.
Steve, you ignorant slut. So I want to preface this conversation. It's really interesting, Steve, as I've been seeing what you're tweeting on Michigan podcast, because I unmuted you again, and as I heard yesterday on Michigan podcast, I agree with your premise and your conclusion, and basically, I think nothing else in between. Because at the end of the day, the NCAA has been trying to commit suicide for a long time. At least that's the way it comes off to me. Okay? The Tez Walker situation in North Carolina, I think it was Tez Walker, that's just the latest example. They rule with they don't rule. They rule with no rhyme or reason, like hardly ever. Most of their policies don't make sense, even when they're enforced. And even less so when they're not enforced. So the NCAA, to me, has always been a joke of an organization. You saw that with even Bucknuts would have agreed during the cheeseburger fiasco with Michigan that, man, this is just, we're really grasping at straws here, guys. So they have no credibility whatsoever. So that's number one. So I want to say that at the outset. No credibility whatsoever. Because the rules that they do enforce are zany, don't make sense, and that's not even talking about the ones that they don't enforce. I think everybody's arguments on both sides of this are just dumb, okay? Or at least not up to snuff. I think on your side of the scenario here, Steve, on your side of the situation, I think it's pretty obvious something shady went down. But is something shady, though, if a lot of people do it? You can't tell me that this doesn't go on. Like, what's the difference between sending people to games and having a Rain Man on your sideline who within the first quarter can decipher all of the calls, all of the signs on the field of the opposing team? What's the difference? What's functionally the difference of that? The only difference is that there was allegedly some organization in place behind all of these sign stealings. So to me, that doesn't really stand up to snuff. On the flip side of the coin as well, you know, if this was just one season And Michigan, which happened miraculously, seemingly, comes out in 2021, goes 11-1 all of a sudden, and they're really dominant, including the most important game of the year. And people are like, something's different here. Something changed here that's not really explained by the coaching, by the players. Something's different here. And it came to find out, hey, they're stealing signs systematically and deeply. Then you might have a case. But you're telling me we're in our third season of this, and you either A, haven't changed your signs, or B, haven't completely gone to a different system, and you want to blame Michigan sign stealing for the fact that you keep getting your butts kicked. If after one season, you might have a case. After 2.5 seasons, more than 2.5 seasons now, that doesn't make any sense to me whatsoever. So both sides' arguments. I mean, yeah. You want to say the 33-3 since you allegedly began stealing signs and 2 of those lots, that doesn't look good. But you want to tell me, if you think that Michigan wouldn't have been as dominant as they have been the last 2.5 plus years, if they wouldn't have been as dominant if they hadn't been stealing signs, I've got a lab in Wuhan to sell you. And you know what? I might mark that price up a little bit. So again, I come back to, the NCAA is not an organization that makes rules and applies them evenly. And any rule that is not applied evenly is not really much of a rule at all. So we're really in the Wild West. So I just don't, to me, this just smacks of, this is not just typical rivalries, Ohio State and Penn State. I think it was James Franklin that came out the other day talking about, I had a shot play. No, your team just sucks in primetime. I'm sorry. We'll talk about that in a little bit. In Ohio State, when it comes to their contentions, I don't know. I saw a great example of this the other day. There was a video from, I believe it was last year's Ohio State game. They were trying to point out a situation where it looked like Michigan knew all the signs that were being called. I think it was on the first drive of the game. So there's this one play. Hey, look, they're making all these sign signals. They know what play is coming. It was a touchdown pass for Ohio State. It just doesn't. Everybody's arguments just suck about this, when at the end of the day, everybody should be united around the fact that the NCAA is the really one that sucks the most. And Steve, when this first broke, I saw the source as coming from the Big Ten, that they had informed Michigan State about this sign stealing investigation. Is it your contention that the firestorm that followed was primarily driven by a television network?
Yeah. I mean,
and which network would that be? The one that doesn't carry any more Big Ten games?
Yes, ESPN.
Oh, there's that. Yeah. So there's that.
Yeah. All right, let's do this, because we just talked a ton of Michigan, and I did it on Michigan podcast. Let's eject them from topic 3 in our original rundown, if you're okay with that.
Sure.
Okay. And instead, let's move topic 3 over to number 1 and talk about Iowa and the aftermath of that call. All right, because that's another issue that at the time we did this rundown, it was largely localized to just pissed off Iowa fans like you, okay? Mm-hmm. And that this is now also mushroomed into a major story, and freaking Aaron Rodgers is commenting on it on the Pat McAfee podcast. All right, so this thing has also blown up. It's become one of the most controversial referee decisions of at least in the Big Ten in recent memory. And again, the floor is yours, my friend, as the Iowa fan here on the panel.
There's not much more that I could add that hasn't been already said on various Iowa podcasts and sports podcasts at the national level, as you pointed out. I will just say that the Big Ten was so comfortable with the ruling on the field that they allowed a half an hour with their head of officiating, I think it was, with a local Des Moines Register sports journalist, as well as one from the St. Paul Pioneer Press. Because that happens after every game. And that is abnormal. Yeah, after every controversial call. That's how comfortable. And of course, the entire conversation there was just completely, admitting no mistakes were made. It was perfectly fine within the rules. I think my favorite part of that conversation with the head of officiating for the Big Ten was where he said, it was really not obvious on the field that Cooper DeJean was waving his hands. But when you look from the bird's eye view, you could really see that he was waving his hands, because everybody knows that all the players on the field have a bird's eye view. That's just, it's dumb. And they know it too, which is why they're lying so much about this. And finally, I would just say there's a contention right away, and I understand it. I totally get it. There's a contention right away. Well, Iowa their defense is so good, they should have never been in that position to begin with. And that's true. But the inverse is also true. Iowa's offense is so bad, Minnesota should have never been in the position where they needed a miraculous call from the officials in order to win that game, okay? So the inverse is true. Terrible call. It's the person, that's still going to go on film for Cooper DeJean, but it's not going to count as a stat. And just feel sick for him. I feel like we were all robbed of a really, really wonderful ending to a Big Ten football game.
I mean, it would have gone down as one of the greatest plays in Big Ten history. I mean, we're talking about probably the greatest punt return in this conference since Desmond Howard struck the pose, man. And at the time, in real time, our game was right after yours, and so I'm kind of paying attention to what's going on and kind of getting ready for my game, and I saw that they had waved it off, and I'm like, oh, maybe that's the rule, I guess. Then I went back after our game was over and saw much more of the coverage and how long it took them to adjudicate this on the field. Yeah,
that's the other thing. They went originally to look at whether or not
see if his knee was down, right?
And then it looked like they were...
Or he stepped out of bounds, yeah.
Maybe this is not what they were doing, but it seemed that because they went to see if he stepped out of bounds or he was down or something, it seemed like they were just hunting for something.
Right.
I'm sure that's to some degree not true, but that's the perception anyway.
And to me, I think, no one on Minnesota was arguing about this.
Yeah.
And to me, this was people with a solution in search of a problem. And I think this is where this was not a controversial play until they made it so. Nobody on the field, nobody in the stands, nobody on the broadcast considered that
nobody
a
knew
fair
what they were
catch
looking
signal.
at.
Nobody did. Minnesota didn't behave like it afterwards. And to me, I think that's where the adults get on the horn and they say, hey, guys, man, come on. What are we doing here?
If you didn't call it on the field.
Exactly. Should have blown it dead then if that was in doubt. All right. Now let's go back to the beginning. The first game of the year in the Big Ten, Penn State and Ohio State. And let's look at this from a Penn State perspective first. James Franklin now 2-12 on the road versus ranked teams, 0-10 on the road versus top 10 teams, 1-9 versus Ohio State, 1-12 versus top 5 teams. And we've got a few more highly ranked teams coming into our league next year. Overall, his record there is very good. They've won a lot of games. He's got a Big Ten championship, but his teams just underperform in these spots over and over again. And what we saw in this game, I think both of us thought Penn State had I know I did. I think you did too.
Yep.
That Penn State had a real chance in this game. I thought there were real matchups in this game that favored Penn State. And that Penn State defense, even when Chop Robinson went down, let's hope he's okay, is still legit, man. That Penn State defense is legit. But I told you the one thing I was concerned about is if Ohio State's defense responds so that now Drew Aller, maybe before he's ready, has to be more of a focal point of this game. And that's what happened. And really, to me, the difference in this game is one quarterback had Marvin Harrison to throw the ball out to, and the other team did not. Yeah. I mean, I think it's just that simple. I think if we switch Marvin Harrison, I think Kyle McCord's probably got a stat line similar to Drew Aller's. I think it's just that simple. One guy's got a potential number 1 overall draft pick to just throw the ball out to when in doubt, and the other team didn't.
Yeah, and kind of like I was saying, a key to the game for Ohio State is get after Drew Aller early and often, and they did that. And they basically proved, hey, we don't really have to respect this quarterback right away and could just double up on the run. And that's what we saw. And I just don't know how you get out of this vortex that James Franklin seems to find himself in. Now, maybe Drew Aller, as he progresses, as he gets more time in the spotlight like this, maybe we'll find out, and maybe those wide receivers and the rest of the receiving core will take some steps here, because that's what I think, from my vantage point, that's what needs to happen in these big games. But as of now, it's the same, different faces, same old song for Penn State and James Franklin.
Let's look at this from the Ohio State side, and it does not look as impressive as we are accustomed to. And keep in mind, Ohio State's playing without a first-round draft pick at wide receiver in Emeka Egbuka. They're playing without a guy who at times has flashed like Heisman Trophy level ability at running back in Travion Henderson. You know what I mean? Those are guys that would be the number 1 options on literally Georgia every other college football team in the country, at least one of those two guys would be the number one option. And they played without both of them. However, even when they've had them at times, this has been more of a grinding offense than we're accustomed to. But I think it's also a nastier, saltier defense at Ohio State than we've seen since Urban Meyer left as well. And so the formula is a little grittier. And, I think Ryan Day wants that. From picking fights with elderly elves, he wants you to know we're a tougher team. And this was a classic grinded out Big Ten game. If I'd have told you that a guy with a sweater vest was on the Ohio State sidelines coaching it, it looked a lot like the Jim Tressel era. And maybe if you're an Ohio State fan, knowing that game you've got coming up at the end of the year in Ann Arbor, maybe you're almost happier winning it this way than kind of winning it the flashier way that you're accustomed to.
Yeah, because that would be a big feather in the cap, and that would shut Lou Holtz up probably for quite a while. But this is, we've seen kind of the same game from Ohio State a couple of times now in the past 3 weeks. One, it was against Maryland, where it's kind of close. It's kind of feeling each other out early. And then Ohio State, as you said before, we've got Marvin Harrison Jr. to throw out too, and that's kind of where you pull away. You hit a few shots, you keep the pressure on the opposing defense, and before you know it, you're up by an insurmountable lead in the fourth quarter, seemingly insurmountable lead in the fourth quarter. So, this is not the Buckeyes' way of winning or aesthetic, the way it looks that Buckeye fans, I think, are used to in years past, but you can't argue with the results. And I just think Ohio State's defense, we might be underrating them a little bit because they have been very consistent this year. Very, very consistent. And I'd be really, really happy about that if I were a fan.
Yep, I agree that we are. Let's talk about another team that we were underrating a week ago, Wisconsin, the Badgers. It looked like your Hawkeyes had taken total control of the West. And, we would argue probably based on how that game against Minnesota went down, should still be in total control of the West. But a gutty win for Wisconsin, down 21-7 heading into the fourth quarter, comes all the way back. That backup quarterback made a couple of big-time throws there down the stretch. Braylon Allen now, he's got the running game going. He's been over 100 yards 3 out of the last 4 games. The defense there is always filthy. And Wisconsin now has control of its own destiny in the West again. However, that could be short-lived because the Buckeyes are coming to town this weekend, and Ohio State has just owned Wisconsin in recent times. So you might, even with the bye week, your Hawkeyes might be back in control of your own destiny in the West Division by the time we talk again next week as it is, Eric. Yeah,
so this was going on at the same time that Iowa's game was going on, so I was not able to give as much attention to this as I was other games. But, I watched a little bit of that backup quarterback last week when Iowa played at Wisconsin. I was pretty impressed how he just came in, and he was looked pretty confident. Didn't have a ton of success, but at least you want your backup to be confident and not just come in there and fall to shambles. So different task, taller task this weekend. I don't like that spot for Ohio State. I like the spot for Wisconsin. You've got them at home. Ohio State off the Big Ten game of the year thus far, at home, and you roll and you come into sleepy little old Madison. Well, not sleepy Madison. It'll be pretty lit, I would imagine.
Especially at night.
Especially at night. You come into Madison. I don't like this spot for Ohio State. I like them to win, but I think Wisconsin might keep this game close into the fourth quarter. So we'll see what kind of Wisconsin team we get. If they can move the ball a little bit on offense with some consistency, you don't have to score on every single drive. That's not the way this game is going to be. But if they can find a little bit of consistency somewhere throughout the game, I like their chances of at least keeping it close late.
And finally, Aaron, Rutgers is bowl eligible before Halloween.
Yep.
Who had that on their bingo card at the start of the year? Rutgers is 6-2 now. Gavin Wimsatt threw for like 25 yards. All right. Okay. But they so dominated Indiana, a little bit like Iowa, so dominated Indiana on defense and special teams. And then the running game, both Wimsatt in the running game and their tailbacks rolled over the Hoosiers. Not really much of a doubt. They were in control of the game. Indiana scored first and was all Rutgers pretty much after that. First time since their first year in the Big Ten, 2014, that Rutgers is bowl eligible. Well, Steve, weren't they in the Gator Bowl a couple of years ago? That was with the academic exception They weren't actually bowl eligible. That team was 5-7. But no, they've earned their way in this year, and we should absolutely acknowledge that and give them their propers.
Yep, that's the most impressive part is in October, before October's even over, as you mentioned here. That, to me, is the most impressive part for Rutgers. And again, just resetting this, we bring up Rutgers quite a bit. It's just so hard. It's just so hard to pound the rock in that division, especially if you're not one of the top 3 teams there. It's just very difficult to do. And so, again, hats off to them for being able to have, I mean, this is a successful season if you're Rutgers, and it's a success before, your last 5 games or last 4 games of the year.
Amen. All right, we'll come back. Let's play Would You Rather when we do. Time now to play Would You Rather here on Bigger 10. Aaron, would you rather bet Michigan State money line at Minnesota or Purdue money line at Nebraska? Both are 2-5 teams on the road against 4-3 teams.
I would rather bet Michigan State money line at Minnesota. That's actually one of my picks this week in our confidence picks. Just taking a risk. I would rather do that. I think there are far more chances, I think, for Michigan State. Minnesota's defense is not as good as Iowa made them look, and Iowa makes a lot of defenses look a lot better than they actually are. I not say that I have a great amount of trust in Michigan State, but again, Minnesota coming off a big road win, get the pig for the first time, win at Iowa this century. That could be a potential letdown spot. Purdue at Nebraska, I don't know what to make of that game. I don't know whatsoever. So I like Michigan State just because of the spot Minnesota's in. First one for you. Would you rather be the Iowa-Minnesota replay official or Connor Stallions?
Oh, my gosh. What a question that is. What a question that is. Is that the greatest? We might have to retire this segment after that. Who could possibly top that? Holy cow. All right. I think I'd rather be Connor Stallions because it means I've got a couple of Big Ten championship rings. And I clearly know a hell of a lot more about college football than the Minnesota-Iowa replay official did, if you know what I'm saying.
Yeah.
But that was exceedingly well done. I mean, that is very well played. Respect. I'll try to nail you next week. All right. Would you rather have a bye week if you're Michigan or Iowa? One team is coming off its biggest road win over its in-state rival. That's Michigan. The other just lost to its biggest Big Ten rival at home for the first time this century. So which scenario do you think would you more want to take the week off?
Iowa, because I'm an Iowa fan.
And that's what you have to endure anyway.
Yeah.
Okay.
Would you rather be a douche after a big win or mature and measured? That's how I took that last question, Steve. The Michigan fan asking an Iowa fan, would you rather be a Michigan fan or an Iowa fan right now? What the hell was that?
I wasn't trying to do that.
See, I
was trying to say, would you rather hey, I don't want to do a letdown. Let's take a week off. Or you're like, I want to get the taste of that out of my mouth right away. Let's get right back on the field. That's what I meant.
I see. I kind of knew that's probably not how you meant it, but I was still going to call you a douche no matter what.
Nice.
I think I'm just still very fragile after.
I hear you.
After what happened.
You know me, man. I can get nihilistic with my teams, man. I can do it. I hear you. Yes.
That's it.
All right. That'll do it. We'll come back. And we'll wrap things up with our Twitter poll results and our feedback of the week next. This week's Twitter feedback, I should say, of the week. Who do you think wins the Big Ten West? Iowa still won this poll at 47%. Wisconsin next at 29%. Minnesota got 8%. Nebraska got 15%. So I believe all these teams still control their own destiny in the Big Ten West. That's why I chose these 4. I think all 4 of them, if any of them win out, they win the West, I believe.
Iowa goes 3-1 because they're 6-2. So 3-1, but their loss is at Nebraska. And Minnesota beats Wisconsin. I guess it would depend on I didn't vote on this on purpose because, again, I'm fragile. I would say if I voted right now, gun to my head, I would probably still say Iowa. Not because I have a great deal of confidence in them, But parlaying all three of those teams together, the rest of those teams together, I have even less confidence in that. So that's kind of my answer.
There you go. That brings us to our feedback of the week, which is a response to the graphic we showed you earlier in the episode of James Franklin in games against elite competition. Teddy Hayes, who's a big Buckeye fan, says, "Didn't you two nerds pick Penn State to win today?"
Indeed.
Indeed. See, I had no idea you were going to light me up like that, so I thought I'd end the show with somebody lighting me up. I didn't know the whole show would be somebody lighting me up. Okay? But I think I'm taking it okay. I think I'm taking it well.
Yeah, you're doing
So,
good.
dude, Teddy, you got scoreboard, man. You can run all the smack you want. You're right. We were wrong. That's why I wanted to make sure to highlight you, brother. All right, don't forget to like, rate, subscribe, follow, and 5-star, whether you're watching here on iTunes, or on YouTube, I should say, or listening on iTunes and elsewhere. We would love it if you did those things because it would help us to find more Big Ten fans just like you. And also, you can follow us in between episodes on Twitter at Bigger10. And as I said that out loud, I don't think I've posted on the Bigger 10 account like all week long because I've been so obsessed with the Michigan story. So I hope you have been, Aaron, because I don't think I have, actually.
I have not. I can fix that.
So most of the time we're posting there. On game days, you can definitely find us there. All right. And you'll probably find Aaron there on Saturday rooting for both Michigan State and Ohio State, I would imagine.
Yes.
Yes. So don't forget to follow us there on Twitter, and also don't forget to join us next week right here on Bigger 10. Until then, for Aaron McIntyre, I'm Steve Deace. We'll see you then.